The wagon wheel cracked at 3 in the afternoon, December 1st, 1876. Caleb Mercer heard the sound before he felt the jolt. A sharp snap like a rifle shot, and then the whole rig lurched sideways, throwing Birdie against Nettie's chest and sending a cascade of flour sacks tumbling toward the back gate. He pulled the horses to a stop and sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the reins, breath clouding in the frigid air. Behind him, 4 faces waited. Ezra, 17 and already wearing the hard expression of someone who had stopped expecting good news. Nettie, 13, clutching Birdie on her lap while her younger brother Micah pressed against her side. And Birdie herself, 4 years old, thumb in her mouth, watching Caleb with the absolute trust that still made his chest ache every time he noticed it. None of them were his blood. All of them were his responsibility. Caleb remembered the day he found them. September, somewhere in Nebraska territory. The wagon train ahead had stopped for no reason anyone could explain. When Caleb rode forward to investigate, he discovered a circle of people that's staring at 2 children sitting beside the trail. A girl, maybe 13, holding a boy half her age against her chest. Their parents had died of scarlet fever 3 days earlier. The wagon master had buried the bodies and left the children with a week's worth of food and a prayer. Nobody wanted to take them. Extra mouths, extra weight, extra risk. Caleb had watched the wagon train pull away without them. He had watched the girl's face as she understood what was happening. No tears, no begging, just a stillness that was worse than screaming. Ezra had grabbed his arm. "We cannot," he said. "We barely have enough for ourselves." Caleb had studied his brother, the boy who had watched their mother die of fever when Caleb was 15 and Ezra just 10, who had helped bury their father in frozen ground 2 years ago after the blizzard took him. "Would you want someone to leave us?" Caleb asked. Ezra had not answered. That night, Nettie and Micah slept in the Mercer wagon for the first time. 3 weeks later, they found Birdie. The child was sitting beside a frozen creek in Wyoming territory, next to a shape that had once been her mother. The woman's arms were still wrapped around empty air, still trying to hold the daughter she had pushed away at the last moment. Pushed away so Birdie would not freeze against a dead body. Pushed away so someone might find her alive. Caleb did not remember making a decision. He simply picked the girl up and carried her to the wagon. She did not speak for 3 days. When she finally did, her first word was Mama. Her second word was Caleb. Now he climbed down from the driver's seat and walked around to examine the damaged wheel. The rear spoke had split along an old crack. He should have noticed back in Laramie. Should have spent the money to replace it. Should have done a lot of things. The money was gone now anyway. He crouched in the frozen mud and ran his fingers along the splintered wood. Fixable. Maybe. If he could find timber straight enough and time enough and luck enough. Time was the one thing they did not have. He studied the sky. Gray clouds pressing down like a lid on a pot. The air held that particular stillness that came before heavy snow. He had grown up in Pennsylvania mining country, and he knew what winter looked like when it was getting ready to kill you. This was what it looked like. Ezra appeared beside him, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. The boy examined the broken wheel without speaking. Then he turned and studied the landscape to the north, toward the mountains barely visible through the haze. "How far?" he asked. Caleb stood up slowly. His knees ached. Everything ached these days. At 22, he moved like a man twice his age. The land office said 3 miles from where the creek forks. "We should be close." Should be, the words hung between them. Nothing had been what it should be since they left Pennsylvania. He was 22 years old with 4 orphaned children depending on him. A broken wagon, a frozen valley, and 3 weeks before real winter arrived. The journey had already taken everything from them. Would this new land take even more? They rigged the wheel with rope and prayer, and they pushed on. The horses moved slowly, picking their way along a trail that was more suggestion than road. Caleb walked beside the wagon now, one hand on the rigging, feeling every wobble of the damaged wheel through his frozen fingers. Ezra walked on the other side. The others stayed in the wagon. Nettie sang softly to Birdie, some song her mother had taught her before the sickness came. The melody drifted across the frozen air, fragile and beautiful. They came over a low ridge just as the gray afternoon light began to fade, and Caleb stopped walking. Below them lay a valley. He pulled the deed from his pocket, read the words again, though he had memorized them weeks ago. 40 acres of prime bottomland, natural spring, timber access, perfect for homesteading. He studied the valley below. The bottomland was a narrow strip of rocks and sage. The spring, if it existed, was frozen or dry. The timber stood 3 miles away, unreachable in winter. This is not right. Ezra's voice cracked. This cannot be the place, but it was. Caleb recognized the landmarks from the surveyor's description. The fork in the creek, the rock formation shaped like a sleeping bear, the line of ridges to the north. This was the land they had bought, the land they had paid $200 for, everything their father had left them. He felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. The agent in Laramie, he said slowly, the one with the nice office and the friendly smile. Ezra's face went pale. You think I think we paid $200 for land nobody else wanted. Caleb crumpled the deed in his fist. I think we are not the first family he has done this to, and I think we have no way to prove it and no money to fight it. So we have nothing. We have this, Caleb gestured at the frozen valley. Whatever it is, we have each other. And we have 3 weeks before winter kills us. Nettie had climbed down from the wagon, Birdie still in her arms. The little girl's face was red with cold, her nose running. She had been coughing for 3 days now, a wet, rattling sound that woke Caleb in the night. Is this our new home, Nettie asked. Her voice held no accusation, no disappointment, just a quiet question from a girl who had already lost everything once. Caleb found himself staring at Birdie, at the way she pressed her small face against Nettie's shoulder, at the absolute trust in her posture, the certainty that the adults around her would make everything right. Yes, he said, this is home. He picked up the wagon tongue and started walking again. Behind him, the others followed. One step at a time, it was all they could do. They built the cabin in 13 days. It nearly killed them. Caleb worked from first light until he could no longer see his hands in front of his face. He felled juniper trees with an axe that grew heavier with each swing. He dragged logs through frozen mud that sucked at his boots and tried to steel them with every step. He notched and fitted and lifted until his arms trembled, and his back screamed, and his fingers bled through his worn leather gloves. Ezra worked beside him. The boy never complained, never slowed down, never asked if they could rest. He just picked up the next log and carried it to the cabin site and went back for another. By the third day, Caleb stopped thinking of him as a boy. Nettie ran the camp with quiet efficiency. She kept the fire going, cooked what little food they had left, watched over Birdie and Micah. She melted snow for water and boiled it clean. She mended clothes and sharpened tools and somehow, impossibly, kept them all fed on salt pork and dried beans and hope. Micah carried water. It was a small job, but he did it with fierce dedication. Back and forth from the creek, again and again, his small boots crunching through the ice at the edges. His hands grew raw and red. He never stopped. Birdie stayed wrapped in blankets by the fire. Her cough grew worse. Then on the 5th day, it began to improve. Caleb did not let himself believe it at first. He had watched his mother get better before she got worse, had watched hope become the cruelest thing of all. But day by day, Birdie's breathing eased. Her fever faded. By the 8th day, she was asking when she could go outside and play. Nettie met Caleb's eyes across the fire that night, and something passed between them. Something that did not need words. They might actually survive this. The cabin took shape, 18 feet by 20. One room, a sleeping loft for the children. The stove went in the northwest corner where the chimney could draw against the prevailing wind. Caleb had helped his father build a cabin once when he was 12. He remembered the basic principles. He remembered the way the logs needed to fit together, the importance of chinking the gaps, the angle of the roof that would shed snow. He did not remember how much it would hurt. Every night he crawled into his bedroll with muscles that felt like they had been pounded with hammers. Every morning he got up and did it again. On the 11th day, Ezra dropped a log on his foot. The boy sat in the mud, face white with pain, and did not make a sound. Just sat there, breathing through his teeth, while Caleb gently removed his boot and examined the damage. Nothing broken, just bruised. Badly bruised. Can you walk? Caleb asked. Ezra stood up, took one step, then another. His face was still white, but his jaw was set. "I can work," he said, and he did. On the 13th day, they lifted the last roof beam into place. Caleb stood back and studied what they had built. It was not pretty. The logs were rough and uneven. The chinking was thick in places and thin in others. The door hung slightly crooked. But it was a cabin. It was shelter. It was home. Birdie appeared at his side, tugging at his coat. "House," she said. "Our house." Caleb felt something shift in his chest, some weight that he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it was there. "Our house," he agreed. They moved in on the 14th day. Caleb built the first fire in the stove that afternoon. He used the last of their dry kindling, carefully arranging the pieces the way his father had taught him. Birdie watched from Nettie's lap, eyes wide. "Fire," she said. "Pretty fire." It was pretty. Yellow flames dancing behind the stove's iron door, heat beginning to radiate into the cold room. The smell of wood smoke, sharp and somehow comforting. They needed more wood, Caleb thought. That was when he realized the problem. He had been so focused on building the cabin that he had not thought about what came next, about how they would stay warm through the long months ahead, about where the fuel would come from. He knew there was timber. He had seen the pine forest 3 miles to the northeast. Tomorrow he would take the wagon and bring back a load. Tomorrow. Tomorrow came gray and cold. Caleb hitched the horses and drove northeast, Ezra beside him on the wagon seat. The damaged wheel had been patched with rope and prayer, and it wobbled with every rotation. But it held. The pine forest was worse than he expected, not the trees themselves. They were tall and straight, good timber, the kind his father would have approved of. The problem was what lay beneath them. Slash piles. Dozens of them. Some previous logging operation had cut through this forest, taking what they wanted and leaving the rest. Branches and trunk sections and half-rotted logs lay in great tangled heaps, frozen solid, and wet. Caleb kicked at one of the piles. Ice crackled and broke. Underneath, the wood was dark with moisture, saturated from the October rains and the November snow. "This is no good," Ezra said. Caleb did not answer. He walked deeper into the forest, checking tree after tree. The standing timber was better, but not by much. The bark was icy. The wood beneath showed the telltale darkness of high moisture content. They loaded what they could find, selecting the driest pieces from the slash piles, cutting a few branches from living trees. When the wagon was full, they headed back. The first test fire was a disaster. Caleb arranged the pine in the stove, lit it with their precious kindling, and stepped back to watch. The fire smoldered. Thick white smoke billowed out around the stove door, filling the cabin with choking haze. The wood hissed and popped and refused to catch. Birdie started coughing. Then Micah. Then all of them. Caleb threw open the door in the single window, letting the cold air rush in. He pulled the smoking wood from the stove with bare hands, burning his fingers, and threw it out into the snow. They stood in the open doorway, gasping and coughing, watching the smoke clear. Nettie was the first to speak. "What just happened?" she asked. "The wood is wet." Caleb studied his burned fingers. He could not feel them. Frozen wet. It will not burn until it dries. How long does it take to dry? Weeks. Months. Caleb closed his eyes. Depends on the weather, on how you stack it, on a lot of things. Silence. Then Ezra spoke, his voice tight. "So we have a cabin, but no fire, and winter is coming." Caleb opened his eyes. His gaze moved across each of their faces. His brother, the 3 children who depended on them. "We have juniper," he said, "and sage. They burn faster, but they burn. We will use those for now while we figure something out." "Figure what out?" Ezra's voice cracked. "The wood is wet, Caleb, all of it. Every tree in those mountains has been soaking for months. What are we supposed to figure out?" "I do not know yet." The words fell like stones into still water. "I do not know yet, but I will." They had the cabin, but the wood would not burn, and outside the temperature was dropping. Sometimes survival is not about what you can build. It is about what you can solve. Silas Krenshaw arrived 3 days later. Caleb heard the horse before he saw it, a steady rhythm of hoofbeats approaching from the south, unhurried, confident. He set down the axe he had been using to split juniper and walked around to the front of the cabin. The man who rode into their clearing was thick-bodied and gray-bearded, dressed in a wool coat that looked like it cost more than everything the Mercers owned combined. His horse was sleek and well-fed, its breath steaming in the cold air. He did not dismount. "You must be the Mercer boy," he said. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost friendly. "I am Silas Krenshaw. I own the general store in Redwater Gulch." Caleb nodded but did not speak. Krenshaw surveyed the clearing, took in the rough cabin, the pile of wet wood, the thin spiral of smoke rising from the chimney. "Nice place," he said, "for 13 days' work." Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How do you know how long we have been here?" Krenshaw smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "I make it my business to know things, son. Who comes, who goes, who is struggling, and who is not." He leaned forward in his saddle. "And you," he continued, "are struggling." Caleb let the silence speak. "The wood from those pine slopes is worthless until spring." Krenshaw gestured toward the northeast. "Everyone who comes here late in the season learns that the hard way. Most of them do not make it to Christmas." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I came to offer you a deal." "What kind of deal?" "I will buy your land, $50 cash. You can use the money to get back to wherever you came from." $50. Caleb felt the anger rising. "We paid $200 for this land." Krenshaw shrugged. "You paid $200 to a con man in Laramie who sells the same worthless parcels 3 times a year. That is not my problem. My offer is 50. Take it or leave it. We will leave it. Suit yourself." Krenshaw straightened in his saddle. "In that case, I have another offer. I have dry firewood in Redwater. Good pine, properly seasoned. I can sell you enough to get it through winter." "How much?" $15 a cord. I reckon you would need at least 10 cords to keep a family your size warm until spring. Call it $150. Caleb laughed. It was not a happy sound. "We do not have $150. We do not have $50. Krenshaw nodded as if he had expected this. "I also offer credit. Easy terms. You can pay me back in the spring with your first harvest. And if we cannot pay, then I take the land." Krenshaw smiled again. "At current market value, of course, which is about $50. Caleb stared at him. He understood now. Understood the game Krenshaw was playing. Either he sold now for 50 or he borrowed and lost the land anyway. Either way, Krenshaw won. "Get off my property," Caleb said. The softness left Crenshaw's voice. "Think carefully, boy. I am offering you a way out. Winter out here does not negotiate. Winter does not offer second chances. Neither do I." Caleb picked up his axe. "Leave, now." For a long moment, Krenshaw did not move. Then he gathered his reins and turned his horse. "You will change your mind," he said over his shoulder. "They always do. By January, when the cold gets deep, you will come crawling to my store begging for help." He kicked his horse into motion. "And I will be waiting," he called back, "with terms you will like even less than these." Caleb watched him go. The hoofbeats faded into silence. The gray clouds pressed lower. The wind picked up, sharp with the promise of snow. Ezra appeared at the cabin door. Who was that? Caleb held his tongue for a moment. Then he hefted the axe. "Nobody important," he said, but they both knew he was lying. That night, Caleb could not sleep. He lay in the darkness, listening to the wind probe the cabin walls, listening to the fire slowly dying in the stove, listening to Birdie's steady breathing from the loft above. The cold was already seeping in. They were burning juniper and sage, the only dry wood they could find. It burned hot but fast. Every 2 hours, someone had to feed the stove. Every 2 hours, their supply grew smaller. At this rate, they would run out before Christmas. And then what? Caleb closed his eyes and tried to think. Tried to remember everything his father had taught him about survival, about making do, about the difference between working hard and working smart. His father had been a coal miner for 20 years, had spent his life underground, digging through darkness, breathing dust, coming home each night with black lines etched into the creases of his hands that never washed clean. He had died in a blizzard 2 years ago, going out for firewood they did not have. Some people thought it was foolish. Going out in a storm like that, risking his life for a few armloads of wood. Caleb knew better. His father had known exactly what he was doing, had known the odds, had gone anyway, because his sons were cold and the fire was dying, and that was what fathers did. The body was found 3 days later, half a mile from the cabin, still holding the wood. Caleb had carried him home, had buried him beside their mother, had sworn, standing there in the snow, that he would find a better life, a place where winter could not reach them, a future worth living. And now here he was, another winter, another cabin, another fire dying in the night. But this time he had 4 children depending on him. He could not fail. He would not fail. The memory came to him sometime after midnight. His father's voice, rough with coal dust and affection, explaining something about the mines. Down deep, his father had said, the temperature never changes. 50 degrees in summer, 50 degrees in winter. The earth keeps its own counsel. Caleb sat up. 50 degrees. Above freezing. If he could get wood underground into that constant warmth, it would dry. Slowly, but steadily. Protected from the snow, from the ice, from the freezing nights and thawing days that kept the surface wood perpetually wet. He needed to build a cellar. No, he needed to build something more. He needed to build a furnace beneath the ice. In the darkest hour of the longest night, Caleb remembered his father's voice. And in that memory, he found the beginning of a plan. But could he make it work before the cold closed in? The idea was simple. The execution was murder. December 15th, 1876. The ground temperature was 4 degrees above zero. The wind came down from the mountains like a blade of ice, and Caleb Mercer stood in the gray dawn light, pickaxe in hand, staring at the frozen earth. He had marked out a rectangle on the south side of the cabin, 12 feet by 8, close enough to the building that the cabin's mass would keep the soil slightly warmer, far enough away that digging would not undermine the foundation. Ezra stood beside him, breath clouding. You really think this will work? He asked. Caleb hefted the pickaxe. I think it has to work. He swung. The pickaxe bounced off the frozen ground like he had struck iron. The impact jarred his shoulders, sent pain shooting through his elbows. A chip of ice flew up and stung his cheek. He swung again, and again, and again. By the time the sun rose fully, he had made a dent, maybe 3 inches deep. His arms trembled. His back ached. They ached. His hands, even through the heavy gloves, felt like they were burning. Ezra took the pickaxe without a word. The boy swung with the same relentless rhythm. No wasted motion, no breaks, just the steady crack, crack, crack of steel on frozen earth. They traded off every 30 minutes. By noon, they had broken through the frost layer and into the softer soil beneath. The going was easier now, but not by much. The cold crept up through the ground, through their boots, into their bones. Nettie appeared with an idea that changed everything. She had been watching them struggle, her quick mind working. Hot water, she said. We heat water on the stove and pour it on the frozen ground. It softens the earth before you dig. Caleb stared at her. Your mother taught you that. She taught me to solve problems. Nettie shrugged. This is just a problem. They tried it. Buckets of steaming water poured on the frozen soil. Within minutes, the ice crystals melted and the ground became workable. It was still brutal labor, but it was possible. Micah took charge of the water operation. He kept a constant rotation of buckets heating on the stove, timing them perfectly so there was always hot water ready when they needed it. The boy had found his purpose. By the end of the first day, they had a hole 3 feet deep. By the end of the 5th day, they had a hole 6 feet deep. And Caleb had an idea that might actually work. He explained it by lamplight, sketching in the dirt floor of the cabin while the others gathered around. The underground room will hold heat, he said. Not much, but some. The earth keeps it at about 50 degrees. That is warm enough to dry wood, but too cold to do it fast. So what do we do? Nettie asked. We add heat. Caleb pointed to the stove in the corner. Right now, most of the warmth from that fire goes up the chimney. Wasted. But what if we caught some of that waste heat and pushed it down into the cellar? How? A channel. He drew a line from the stove to the edge of the cabin. We run a pipe from behind the stove, through the foundation, down into the room. Warm air rises, cold air sinks. We put an inlet low and an outlet high, and the air circulates on its own. Ezra leaned forward, studying the drawing. And the outlet goes up through the earth and out, like a chimney in reverse. The warm air comes in at the bottom, moves through the wood stacks, and exits at the top. Constant circulation, constant drying. The quiet stretched between them for a long moment. Then Ezra smiled. It was the first real smile Caleb had seen from him in months. "That is actually brilliant," he said. "It is Pa." Caleb set down the stick he had been using to draw. "He taught me about airflow in the mines, how they kept the shafts ventilated, how they used natural temperature differences to move air without pumps." He studied his brother. "I am just applying what he already knew." They built it together. Ezra designed the pipe system using scavenged metal from an old stovepipe they found half buried near the creek. He bent and shaped it with pliers and determination, creating a channel that would catch the rising heat and redirect it downward. Caleb cut through the cabin's foundation logs, a careful operation that took 2 days and left him sick with worry that the whole structure might shift. But it held. The logs settled slightly and then stabilized, and the gap was just wide enough for the metal sleeve. Nettie built shelves in the underground room. Not fancy, just rough-cut boards laid across support beams, but they would keep the wood off the ground and allow air to circulate beneath. Micah became the temperature monitor. He discovered that he could gauge the system's health by the vent stack. Put your hand near the opening, feel the warmth rising. Strong flow meant the stove was hot and the circulation was working. Weak flow meant something needed attention. He checked it every few hours. It made him feel important. And Birdie made them all stop for meals. It was her job, Nettie decided, an important job, making sure the workers ate. The little girl took it seriously, toddling around the worksite with her small tin plate, offering bites of cornbread and sips of water. She was still coughing sometimes, but less, and her eyes were bright. On December 20th, they finished. The underground room was complete. 6 feet deep, 12 feet long, 8 feet wide. Timber-lined walls, slatted floor raised on short posts, a sloping metal pipe running from behind the stove to the far corner. A vent stack rising up through 6 feet of earth and emerging 2 feet above ground, capped against snow, but open enough for air to escape. Caleb stood at the bottom of the ladder, gazing up at the rectangle of gray sky. "Let us test it," he said. Upstairs, Ezra opened the baffle they had built into the pipe system, a simple metal plate that could slide open or closed, controlling how much warm air flowed into the underground room. Caleb waited. At first, nothing. Then he felt it, a gentle movement of air, a whisper of warmth against his face. He placed his hand near the vent stack, where the air would exit. Cold, that was right. The warm air was coming in at the bottom, rising through the empty shelves and pushing the cold air out through the top. He climbed the ladder. "It works," he said. Ezra was grinning. Nettie had tears in her eyes. Micah was jumping up and down, and Birdie was clapping her hands without knowing why. "Now," Caleb said, "we fill it." They had built something impossible. A furnace beneath the ice. A room that would dry wood in the heart of winter. But filling it was just the beginning, and not everyone would be happy about their success. Within 2 days, the underground room stabilized at 55 degrees, warm enough to dry wood, cool enough that the timber supports were in no danger. Perfect. They developed a rhythm. Every morning, Caleb and Ezra hitched the repaired wagon and drove to the pine forest. They selected the least wet wood they could find, cut it to stove length, and loaded as much as the horses could pull. Every afternoon, they stacked it in the underground room. Fresh wood went to the back. Each day's load got marked with charcoal on the wall. Week 1, shwoo. Week 2, as the weeks passed, the wood would migrate forward, each load drier than the one behind it. Nettie managed the system with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. She kept track of what came in, what went out, and what was ready to burn. She rationed their use of the dried wood, allowing only what was absolutely necessary, and she taught the others to do the same. By Christmas, they had 2 cords of properly dried wood stacked in the underground room. Not enough for the whole winter, but enough. Enough to take the edge off, enough to survive. Christmas Day, 1876. Caleb built a proper fire in the stove. Not the smoldering, smoking attempts of those first terrible days, but a real fire. Bright flames, steady heat, wood that caught and burned clean. The cabin grew warm, actually warm. Birdie sat in front of the stove, her small hands spread toward the heat, and laughed, just laughed. The pure, unself-conscious joy of a child who was warm and safe and did not fully understand how rare that was. Nettie made a Christmas dinner from what they had: salt pork, fried crisp, beans with molasses, cornbread with the last of their sugar sprinkled on top. It was not much, but it was theirs. They ate by firelight, the five of them. And for the first time since Pennsylvania, Caleb felt something like hope. "We did it," Ezra said. He was studying the cabin, at the warm walls, at the faces of the children, at the fire burning steady and true. "We actually did it." "We did," Caleb agreed. But even as he said it, he knew they were not done. Winter had not even reached its peak, and their success had not gone unnoticed. The knock came 3 days after Christmas. It was after dark, the kind of deep darkness that only exists in places far from cities, far from gaslights, far from the comfort of other people. Caleb had just finished banking the fire for the night when he heard it. 3 sharp raps. He grabbed the rifle from its place beside the door and approached carefully. "Who is there? Please." A woman's voice, high with fear. "Please, we need help." Caleb opened the door. She stood in the snow, a thin coat wrapped around her shoulders, a baby in her arms. Behind her, a man who looked like he had not slept in days. And between them, a boy about Micah's age, shivering so hard his teeth chattered. The Holloways. Caleb had seen them at a distance but never spoken to them. They had a claim about a mile to the east. "Our fire," Mrs. Holloway was crying. "The wood will not catch. We have been trying for hours. My son is sick. Please." Caleb studied the boy, at his blue lips, at the way he swayed on his feet. He studied the baby in Mrs. Holloway's arms, at the small face barely visible above the blankets, at the stillness that could have been sleep or could have been something worse. "Bring them in," he said. Nettie was already moving, pulling blankets from the beds, positioning chairs near the stove. Ezra fed more wood to the fire, building it higher than they normally allowed, and the heat intensified. The Holloways huddled together, drinking hot coffee, warming their hands. The boy stopped shivering after an hour. The baby began to cry after 2. Crying was good. Crying meant alive. When they had warmed enough to speak clearly, Mr. Holloway told their story. It was the same story Caleb had lived himself. Late arrival, wet wood, a cabin that would not stay warm. "We have been burning scraps," Holloway said. "Fence posts, chair legs, anything that would catch. But it is not enough. It is not nearly enough." Caleb met Ezra's eyes. Ezra nodded. "Wait here," Caleb said. He climbed down into the underground room with a lantern. The warmth embraced him immediately. That steady 55 degrees that felt like summer compared to the world above. He selected a quarter cord of their driest wood, the pieces that had been in the room the longest, and began passing them up the ladder. Ezra loaded them onto the Holloway wagon. Mrs. Holloway watched with tears streaming down her face. "We cannot pay you," she said. "We have nothing." "It is not about payment." Caleb helped her into the wagon. "When you are able, you help the next family that needs it." She stared at him like he had spoken a foreign language. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help us? You do not even know us." Caleb thought about his father, about the man who had walked into a blizzard to find firewood for his sons, about the body found 3 days later, still holding the wood. "Because this is what people do," he said. "This is what survival looks like. Not one family alone, all of us together." The Holloways drove away into the darkness. Caleb watched their lantern until it disappeared. The first family had come for help. Caleb gave it freely, without hesitation. But word travels fast in a frozen valley, and not everyone would be grateful for what the Mercers had built. Word spread. It spread like fire through dry grass, like water through cracked stone, like hope through desperate hearts. The Mercer family has dry wood. The Mercer family has a secret. The Mercer family can save you. January. Second, another knock at the door. A family of 5 from the other side of the creek. Their youngest had pneumonia. Caleb gave them wood. January 4th, 3 more families, all with the same story. Wet wood, cold cabins, children coughing through the night. Caleb gave them wood. January 6th, a lone man from Redwater Gulch itself. He had heard about the Mercers from someone who had heard from someone else. His wife was pregnant. Their cabin was an icebox. Caleb gave him wood. Each gift meant less for his own family. Each act of generosity was a calculation, a gamble, a prayer that they could dry enough new wood to replace what they gave away. Nettie kept the books. She tracked every armload, every bundle, every stick. She knew exactly how much they had, how much they were producing, how much they were losing. By January 10th, the math was getting bad. "We cannot keep this up," she told Caleb. Her voice was quiet, meant for his ears only. "We are giving away more than we are making. At this rate, we run out by February." Caleb knew she was right. But every time someone knocked on that door, he saw Birdie's face, saw the way she had coughed in those first terrible days, saw the blue tinge that had touched her lips before they got the underground room working. He saw his own children in every desperate family that came to them, and he could not turn them away. "We need a system," Ezra said. He had been listening from across the cabin. "Real distribution, limits, rules." Caleb nodded slowly. A quarter cord per week per family, enough to get them through the coldest nights. Not enough to save them completely, but enough to buy time. And in exchange, nothing. Caleb met his brother's eyes. "We give because we can, because that is what Pa would have done. Pa died doing what he thought was right." "I know." Caleb's voice was rough. "I know he did. But he was not wrong, Ezra. He was not wrong to help people. He was just alone when he did it. So what makes us different? We are not alone." Caleb surveyed the cabin. At Nettie, at Micah, at Birdie sleeping in the loft, at Ezra himself. We have each other, and we have time to build something that lasts. Build what? Caleb did not answer. He was not sure yet, but the shape of an idea was forming in his mind. Something bigger than firewood. Something more lasting than charity. Then Krenshaw struck back. It started with whispers. Little rumors that floated through the valley like smoke. The Mercers are hoarding. The Mercers are getting rich off other people's suffering. The Mercers have enough wood to save everyone, but they only give scraps. Caleb heard the rumors from Mrs. Holloway, who came to warn them. "It is Krenshaw," she said. Her face was tight with anger. "He has been losing customers since word spread about your underground room. Nobody wants to pay his prices when they can get help for free." Caleb nodded grimly. "Of course it was Krenshaw. He is telling people you are building a monopoly, that you will start charging once everyone depends on you." She hesitated. "Some people believe him. Let them believe what they want. You do not understand." Mrs. Holloway lowered her voice. "There is talk of taking what you have. Some of the men from Redwater, the ones who owe Krenshaw money, they are saying you cannot guard that room every hour of every day." Caleb felt the cold settle deeper in his chest. "Is that a threat?" "It is a warning." She touched his arm. "You have been good to us. I want you to be careful." That night, Caleb reinforced the lock on the underground room hatch. He installed a heavy wooden bar that could only be opened from inside the cabin. He told Ezra to start keeping the rifle closer. But even as he prepared for conflict, he knew that defenses were not the answer. You could not guard your way through winter. You could not fight your way to spring. There had to be another way. The thieves came on a Wednesday. Caleb woke to a sound he could not identify, a scraping, grinding noise from somewhere outside the cabin. He lay still for a moment, listening, and then he heard it again. The underground room. He was out of bed and moving before his mind fully registered what was happening. The rifle was in his hands. His bare feet hit the frozen floor. He threw open the cabin door and ran into the night. Too late. The hatch to the underground room stood open. A lantern flickered at the bottom of the ladder, casting crazy shadows on the walls. Footprints in the snow led away to the south, already filling with fresh powder. And when Caleb descended the ladder, his heart sank. A third of their supply was gone. The thieves had known exactly what they were doing. They had taken the driest wood, the pieces from the front sections that had been curing the longest. They had left the newer wood, the stuff that was still too wet to burn efficiently. They had stolen weeks of survival. Ezra appeared at his shoulder, breathing hard. "They are gone," he said. "The tracks lead toward Redwater, but the snow is covering them fast." Caleb stood in the middle of the violated room, surrounded by toppled stacks and scattered debris. His hands were shaking. Not from cold. "Did you see them?" "No, but I found this." Ezra held up a scrap of cloth, wool, Fine wool, the kind that came from expensive coats, the kind Silas Krenshaw wore. Caleb took the cloth and held it to the lantern light. He did not need evidence to know who was behind this, but having it made the rage burn hotter. "We should go after him," Ezra said. "Confront him. Make him pay." "And then what?" Caleb's voice was flat. "We fight his men. Maybe win, maybe lose. Either way, we spend the winter in a war instead of surviving. So we just let him get away with it. For now." Caleb climbed the ladder. "For now, we focus on what we can control. We double our cutting. We extend our rationing. We get through this." But his hands were still shaking when he locked the hatch again. And in his heart, something had changed. He had come to this valley wanting only to survive, to build a life for himself and the children who depended on him, to be left alone. Now he understood that being left alone was not an option. Krenshaw would not stop. The man saw the Mercers as a threat to his power, his profits, his control, and he would keep pushing until they broke, or he did. The question was not whether there would be a reckoning. The question was what form it would take. They had become targets of their own success. Thieves in the night, rumors spread by a greedy man, but Caleb knew that walls and locks could only do so much. To truly survive, he would need something more powerful than force. January 15th, the temperature dropped to 15 degrees below zero. Caleb had never known cold like this. It was not just an absence of warmth, it was a presence, a living thing that crept through every crack and gap, that turned breath to ice before it left your lips, that made the air itself feel thick and sharp. The cabin held, barely. They burned wood constantly now, feeding the stove every 2 hours, keeping the fire hot enough to push back the cold. The underground room kept producing, but slower. The extreme cold was affecting even that protected space. And on the 4th day of the cold snap, Birdie got sick again. It started with a cough, the same wet, rattling sound that had terrified Caleb in those first days after their arrival. By nightfall, she had a fever. By the next morning, she could barely breathe. Nettie tried everything: hot compresses, steam from boiling water, the willow bark tea her mother had taught her to make. Nothing worked. "She needs medicine," Nettie said. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red from lack of sleep. "Real medicine, not what I can make from herbs." Caleb knew what that meant. The only medicine in the valley was at Crenshaw's store. He went anyway. The ride to Redwater Gulch took 2 hours in the bitter cold. By the time he arrived, his face was numb and his fingers felt like wood. He tied his horse outside Crenshaw's store and walked through the door. The warmth hit him like a wall. Krenshaw sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He studied Caleb when the door opened, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Mr. Mercer," he said. What a pleasant surprise. Caleb did not waste words. "I need medicine for a child with fever and lung sickness." "I have what you need." Krenshaw set down the paper. "Question is whether you can afford it. Name your price." "Oh, I do not want money." Krenshaw stood up and walked to the shelf where the medicine bottles stood in neat rows. "What I want is much simpler." He turned to face Caleb. "I want you to announce publicly that your underground room is now community property, managed by a committee that I happen to chair." Caleb stared at him. "The little girl who is dying right now," Krenshaw continued, "she is not even your blood. None of them are. They are strays you picked up on the road. Isn't that really worth losing everything?" Caleb felt the rage rise up, and beneath it, something worse: temptation. Krenshaw was right about one thing. Birdie was not his blood. Neither were Nettie or Micah. He had known them for 4 months. 4 months against a lifetime. He could walk away. He could save himself and Ezra. He could, no. The word rose up from somewhere deep inside him. From the place where his father's voice still echoed. From the place where he kept his mother's memory. From the place where he had made a promise, standing in the snow beside a frozen grave. These children were his. Not by blood, by choice. And that was stronger. "Keep your medicine," Caleb said. "Keep your store. Keep your schemes." He turned toward the door. "You will regret this," Krenshaw called after him. "When that little girl touches, you will remember this moment. You will remember that I offered you a way out." Caleb stopped with his hand on the door. He did not turn around. "If she dies," he said quietly, "you had better pray I do not survive the winter either." He walked out into the cold. Birdie was dying. Krenshaw held the medicine. And Caleb had just walked away empty-handed. Sometimes the hardest choices are not between right and wrong. They are between two kinds of wrong. And sometimes, in the darkest moment, help comes from where you least expect it. Caleb rode home through the darkness. His mind was numb, his heart was heavy. His hands on the reins felt disconnected from his body, like they belonged to someone else. He had done the right thing. He knew he had done the right thing. But Birdie might die because of it. When he reached the cabin, there was a horse tied outside that he did not recognize. He burst through the door, rifle ready, expecting the worst. What he found stopped him cold. Mrs. Holloway sat beside the fire, a small bottle in her hands. Nettie was kneeling next to Birdie's bed, administering drops of something to the little girl's lips. And in the corner, watching with quiet satisfaction, stood a young woman Caleb had never seen before. She was maybe 18, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "What?" Caleb started. "Medicine," Mrs. Holloway said. "Real medicine." "From where?" "From me." The young woman stepped forward. "My name is Martha Krenshaw. Silas is my uncle." Caleb raised the rifle. "Easy." Mrs. Holloway stood and placed herself between them. "She is not the enemy. She came to help." "Why?" Caleb did not lower the weapon. "Why would Crenshaw's own blood help us?" "Because he is wrong." Martha's voice was steady. "He has been wrong for years. He uses people, hurts them, takes what he wants and calls it business." She moved closer, ignoring the rifle pointed at her chest. "I have seen what you are doing here," she continued. "Helping families who have nothing, sharing what you have, building something real." She gestured toward the bed where Birdie lay. "When Mrs. Holloway told me about the little girl, I knew I had to do something. My uncle has plenty of medicine. He will not miss what I took." Caleb slowly lowered the rifle. "You stole from him. I borrowed." Martha smiled slightly, for a good cause. Caleb watched Birdie, at the color that was already returning to her cheeks, at the steadier rhythm of her breathing. "Thank you," he said. The words felt inadequate. "Do not thank me yet." Martha's expression grew serious. "My uncle will not give up. He sees you as a threat to everything he has built. And men like him do not accept threats. They destroy them. Then we need to destroy him first." "No," Martha shook her head. "That is not how you win. Fighting him makes him stronger. It proves everything he says about you. Then what do? You make him irrelevant." She moved to the window and studied the darkness outside. "Right now you have something everyone needs, but only one supply. That makes you powerful, and it makes you a target. What if everyone had their own supply? What if every family in this valley could dry their own wood, store their own fuel, survive their own winter? You would not be special anymore." She turned back to face him. "But you would be safe, and so would everyone else." Caleb stared at her. She was right. He had been thinking about this wrong from the beginning. Trying to help people by giving them what he had. Trying to save them by sacrificing himself. But that was not saving. That was just delaying the inevitable. Real salvation meant teaching them to save themselves. The idea crystallized over the next 3 days. Birdie recovered. The medicine Martha had brought was exactly what she needed. And by the 3rd day, she was sitting up, asking for food, driving everyone slightly crazy with her 4-year-old energy. Caleb spent those 3 days planning. He talked with Ezra about the technical details, how the underground rooms worked, what made them succeed or fail, what could be simplified for families with less experience. He talked with Nettie about organization, how to coordinate multiple building projects, how to track progress, how to make sure standards were maintained. He talked with Mrs. Holloway about the community, who could be trusted, who was allied with Krenshaw, who was waiting to see which way the wind blew. And on the 4th day, he called a meeting. It was held at the Holloway cabin, which was larger than the Mercer place and could hold more people. 15 families attended, 47 people in all, crowded into a space meant for 10. Old Ephraim Dawes sat in the corner, watching everything with eyes that had seen 70 winners. He was the most respected man in the valley, and Caleb knew that his support would matter. Caleb stood at the front, studying faces he barely knew. Faces that had been strangers 3 months ago. Faces that now held his fate. and the fate of his family in their hands. He began to speak. "You all know what we built," he said. "An underground room that dries wood in winter. A way to stay warm when everything around us is frozen solid. Some of you have benefited from that room. Some of you have heard rumors about it. Some of you have been told that we are hoarding, that we are getting rich, that we plan to control the valley." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Those rumors are lies, spread by a man who profits from your suffering. A man who charges 3 times the fair price for firewood and calls it good business." Murmurs in the crowd. "I am not here to fight that man," Caleb continued. "I am not here to compete with him. I am here to make him irrelevant." He surveyed the room. "I am here to teach you everything I know." The plan was simple. Families would form crews of 3. Each crew would build 3 underground rooms, one for each family, in rotation. Everyone would contribute to all 3 builds. By the time they finished, everyone would understand the system well enough to maintain it on their own. The Mercers would provide expertise and supervision. Caleb would handle excavation and timber work. Ezra would teach the heat channel systems. Nettie would manage organization and scheduling. In exchange, the families would provide their own labor and materials. There was no charge. There was no debt. There was only knowledge, freely shared. "That is madness," someone called from the back. "The ground is frozen. It will take forever." "The ground was frozen when we built ours," Caleb said. "We made it work." "But why would you teach us?" another voice asked. "Why give away what makes you valuable?" Caleb smiled. "Because my value is not in what I have. It is in what I can do. And if everyone in this valley can dry their own wood, store their own fuel, survive their own winter, then we all become stronger together." He found Ezra's eyes, and his brother nodded. "My father was a miner," Caleb said. "He spent 20 years underground, learning how the earth works. He died trying to keep his family warm." His voice roughened. "But before he died, he taught me what he knew. He gave me a gift that could not be stolen or lost or used up. He gave me knowledge. Tonight I am passing that gift on to you. Use it well." In the corner, old Ephraim Dawes slowly rose to his feet. The room fell silent. "I have known Silas Krenshaw for 15 years, Dawes said. His voice was rough with age but strong with conviction. "I have watched him squeeze this valley dry, watched him grow rich while families froze." He walked to stand beside Caleb. "This young man has been here 3 months, and he has done more good in that time than Krenshaw has done in 15 years. He turned to face the crowd. "I am joining the first crew. Who is with me?" Mr. Holloway stood. "I am." Then another family, and another. Within an hour, 7 crews had formed. Caleb stood before the community and offered them something more valuable than wood. He offered them the ability to save themselves. But would they succeed before Krenshaw could stop them? The first crew started the next morning. Mr. Holloway led it, along with old Ephraim Dawes and the Peterson family. They gathered at the Holloway claim just after dawn. Caleb was there to supervise. The process was brutal. The ground was frozen even harder now than it had been when the Mercers dug their room. But they had learned some tricks. Hot water poured on the soil to soften it. Constant rotation to keep fresh arms on the pickaxes. Smaller sections excavated and expanded rather than trying to dig the whole thing at once. By the end of the first day, they had a hole 3 feet deep. By the end of the first week, they had a completed room. Ezra spent 2 days teaching Mr. Holloway's teenage son how to install the heat channel. The boy was quick, picking up the principles faster than Ezra had himself. By the time they finished, he was making suggestions for improvements. The second room went faster, the third room faster still. Within 2 weeks, 3 families had working underground systems. 3 families who no longer needed Crenshaw's overpriced firewood. 3 families who could survive the winter on their own. And word was spreading. Families who had been skeptical at the meeting started showing up at work sites, watching, asking questions. Some joined the building crews. Others went home and started digging on their own, using what they had observed. Micah became an unofficial quality inspector. The boy had an eye for detail that surprised everyone. He could spot a badly set timber support from across a work site, could identify weak points in a heat channel before they became problems, could tell just by looking whether excavated soil had been properly cleared. He took the job seriously, maybe too seriously. More than one adult found themselves being lectured by a 9-year-old about the proper angle for a vent stack. Birdie, fully recovered now, became the mascot of the building crews. She appeared at every site carrying water, offering encouragement, and reminding everyone what they were working for. The men would pause in their digging to watch her toddle between the piles of excavated earth, and something in their faces would soften. They were not just building rooms, they were building a future. Krenshaw made his move on the 4th week. It started subtly. Rumors that the underground rooms were dangerous, that the excavations weakened the soil, that one collapse would kill an entire family. When that did not work, he tried intimidation. Mr. Peterson woke one morning to find his newly completed heat channel destroyed. The metal pipes had been bent and crushed, the connections broken beyond repair. 2 days later, the Dawes family discovered their wood supply had been scattered across the frozen ground. Hundreds of hours of careful stacking, undone in a single night. Caleb called another meeting. "We know who is doing this," he said, "and we know why." "What do we do about it?" Mr. Holloway asked. "We keep building." Caleb gazed around the room. "We replace what was destroyed. We repair what was broken. And we watch each other's backs." "But that is not enough," someone protested. "He will not stop. Then we make sure he cannot succeed." Caleb turned to Martha Krenshaw, who had been attending the meetings quietly for 2 weeks now. "Tell them what you told me." Martha stepped forward. "My uncle has 7 men who work for him," she said. "Some are employees. Some owe him money. He uses them to do his dirty work because he never wants his own hands to get soiled." She paused. "But he is not as strong as he looks. Half the people in Redwater are afraid of him, but the other half are just waiting for someone to stand up. If you show them that he can be beaten, they will join you." "How do we show them that?" Ezra asked. "By succeeding." Martha found Caleb's eyes. "Every room you build, every family you save, every person who survives this winter without his help, that is a defeat for him. Enough defeats, and he becomes what he always was." "What is that?" "A coward," she smiled grimly, "who hides behind his money and his men because he is too weak to face anyone himself." The community organized. They set up watch rotations. 2 men at every completed site every night. Not to fight, but to sound the alarm, to let everyone know if trouble was coming. They set up communication chains. If one family needed help, word would spread within an hour. And they kept building. February came with more snow, more cold, more endless gray skies. But the rooms kept going up. 5, 10, 15. Each one a small victory. Each one proof that they could survive. By the middle of February, 23 families had working underground systems. The price of firewood at Crenshaw's store dropped by half, then by half again. Then he stopped selling it altogether. "He is beaten," Ezra said one night. He was grinning, the first real joy Caleb had seen in him in months. "We actually did it." "Not yet." Caleb surveyed the darkness outside the window. A man like him does not give up. He gets desperate. What can he do now? Everyone has their own supply. "I do not know." Caleb turned away from the window. "But when we find out, we need to be ready." Krenshaw made his last move on a Tuesday. Caleb was not there when it happened. He was 3 miles away, helping the Peterson family install their heat channel. It was Micah who saw the lantern moving toward the Mercer cabin after midnight. The boy did not wake his sisters. He ran. By the time he reached the Holloway cabin, he was gasping, his small lungs burning in the frozen air. He pounded on the door until Mr. Holloway appeared. Rifle in hand. "Someone," Micah wheezed. "At our place. Going toward the underground room." Holloway did not ask questions. He pulled on his boots and sent his eldest son to spread the word. Within an hour, 12 men stood in the shadows around the Mercer cabin. They watched Silas Krenshaw approach the underground room hatch. They watched him pull out tools to break the lock. They watched him work, his breath steaming in the moonlight, his expensive wool coat bright against the snow. And when he finally got the hatch open and turned to descend, they stepped out of the darkness. No one spoke. Krenshaw froze, 1 foot on the ladder. 12 men, 12 faces, 12 pairs of eyes reflecting the moonlight. Mr. Holloway stepped forward. "We have been waiting for you." Crenshaw's face went through several expressions: surprise, fear, and then, strangely, something like relief. "How long?" he asked. Since you started spreading rumors? Holloway's voice was calm. Since you sent your men to steal? Since you tried to let a child die for your pride? Krenshaw studied the circle of men around him, at the faces of people he had cheated and threatened and controlled for years. What happens now? He asked. Now you leave. Holloway pointed toward the south. Tonight, and you do not come back. And if I refuse, then we escort you to the territorial marshal in Helena. Holloway smiled without warmth. And we tell him about the stolen medicine, the destroyed property, the extortion. He leaned closer. Martha has been keeping records, dates, names, amounts, everything you have done for the past 5 years. The color drained from Crenshaw's face. She would not. She already has. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Krenshaw climbed back up the ladder, closed the hatch, brushed the snow from his expensive coat. You think you have won, he said, but this valley will fall apart without me. You need someone to organize things, someone to keep order. We have someone. Holloway nodded toward the darkness. Caleb stepped into the moonlight. He had arrived 10 minutes ago, had watched the confrontation unfold, had waited for the right moment. We have each other, he said. That is all we have ever needed. Krenshaw stared at him, at the young man who had arrived with nothing and built something he could not destroy, at the community that had formed around an idea instead of fear, at everything he had lost. You will regret this, he said. Maybe. Caleb did not look away. But not as much as you will regret what you became. Krenshaw turned and walked into the darkness. No one followed. They did not need to. He was already gone. Krenshaw walked away into the night, defeated not by force but by an idea. The idea that knowledge shared is power multiplied. That survival is not a competition, but a collaboration. That one person teaching many is stronger than one person holding everything. March came with the smell of mud. The snow began to melt. Water ran everywhere, filling creek beds, turning roads to rivers, making every step an adventure. The air softened. The days stretched longer. And on the first truly warm day, Caleb stood on the hill above Juniper Flats and surveyed what they had built. 23 cabins, 23 spirals of smoke rising into the blue sky, 23 families that had survived a winter that should have killed them. Ezra appeared beside him, hands in his pockets. They are calling you something, he said. Did you hear? What? The teacher. Ezra smiled. The man who taught the valley how to stay warm. I did not do it alone. No, but you started it. They stood in silence for a moment. Pa would be proud, Ezra said quietly, of what we built, of who we helped. Caleb nodded. He could feel his father's presence sometimes, in the quiet moments, could hear his voice in the crackle of a well-built fire, could see his hands in the smooth-worn handles of the tools they still used. He was here, Caleb said, every step of the way. From the cabin below, a voice called out, Nettie's voice, dinner is ready, and if you do not come now, Birdie is going to eat everything. Ezra laughed. Race you down, you are on. They ran, stumbling and sliding down the muddy hillside, laughing like they had not laughed in months. At the bottom, Birdie was waiting, jumping up and down with excitement. You came, Caleb scooped her up and swung her onto his shoulders. Of course we came. He carried her toward the cabin. Family does not miss dinner. Inside, Nettie had set the table. 5 places, 5 plates. 5 people who were not related by blood, but who had become something stronger. A family forged by winter. They sat down together. Caleb surveyed the table. At Ezra, who had grown into a man he was proud to know. At Nettie, who had kept them organized and sane. At Micah, who had found a purpose in checking details others missed. At Birdie, who had nearly died and come back fighting. Before we eat, he said, I want to say something. They watched him. A year ago, I was alone. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. My mother was gone. My father was gone. I had nothing but a wagon and a dream of finding something better. He studied each of them in turn. I found it. Not in the land, not in the cabin, not in anything I could build or buy or earn. I found it in you. Birdie clapped her hands. Found us. Found you. Caleb smiled. And I am never letting go. Nettie was crying. She tried to hide it, but she was crying. Now. Caleb picked up his fork. Let us eat. We have a whole spring to prepare for. 20 years later, a newspaper reporter came to Juniper Flats. He was writing a story about the valley, which had become known throughout Montana for its prosperity, for its tight-knit community, for the underground storage systems that every family used. He asked to interview the man who had started it all. Caleb Mercer, 42 years old now, with gray at his temples and laugh lines around his eyes, sat on the porch of his cabin and told the story. He told about the winter of '76, about the frozen ground and the wet wood and the choice between giving up and fighting on. He told about his father, who had died in a blizzard trying to keep his sons warm. He told about 5 orphan children who had found each other on the road and become a family. When he finished, the reporter asked one final question. What would you say is the most important thing you learned? Caleb thought for a moment. Then he smiled. That knowledge is the only thing that grows when you share it. Everything else, wood, food, money, it gets smaller when you give it away. But knowledge gets bigger. The more people who have it, the more powerful it becomes. He studied the valley, at the smoke rising from dozens of chimneys, at the children playing in the spring sunshine, at the life they had all built together. My father gave me what he knew. I passed it on. And now it belongs to everyone. He stood up. That is the real inheritance, not land, not gold, not anything you can hold in your hands. What you can put in people's minds, that lasts forever. The reporter closed his notebook. The interview was over, but the story, the real story, the one about a young man who taught a valley to survive, that story was just beginning to spread, and it is still being told today. The end. Sometimes survival is not about being the strongest or the fastest or the richest. It is about being the one who shares, the one who teaches, the one who understands that we rise together or we fall alone. Caleb Mercer understood that. And because he did, a valley full of strangers became a community. A collection of orphans became a family, and a winter that should have killed them all became the story they told their grandchildren. About the fire beneath the ice, about the warmth that comes from helping others, about the underground furnace that saved them all.